Pay attention to the girl in the black dress standing at that motel counter. Her name is Andrea Maze. She's 19 years old and she has less than 12 hours left before she'll have to make an impossible choice between dignity and survival. Because the man beside her, 34-year-old Edwin Lara, who claims to be protecting her, isn't here to keep her safe. He's already taken one life, and Andrea doesn't know if she'll be next. On this day, Andrea just wants to get through her shift and go home. On this day, Edwin has already decided that won't happen. This is the story of 48 hours that shattered lives, exposed police failures, and ultimately sparked a movement for justice. Andrea Maze was the kind of person who said yes when someone needed help. On July 24th, 2016, she stayed late at work to cover a coworker's shift, even though she'd already put in a full day. The temperature in Salem, Oregon climbed to nearly 90 degrees that evening, and after finally clocking out, Andrea sat in her car with the windows down, scrolling through Snapchat and catching her breath before the drive home. She had her whole life mapped out in her mind, college plans, career goals, the kind of future any 19-year-old girl dreams about. Her family knew her as someone gentle and sheltered, raised in a church-going household where bad things happened to other people in other places. She didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't know anything about the darkness that could exist in the world. When Andrea opened her driver's side window to let in the evening air, a figure suddenly appeared. A hand reached through the opening, followed by the cold metal of a gun barrel. Before she could scream, before she could even process what was happening, the door unlocked. Edwin Lara slid into her car with terrifying speed, the weapon pointed directly at her chest. "He handcuffed me right there," Andrea would later recall, her voice still carrying the weight of that moment. "Made me climb over to the passenger side. And then he just kept talking, asking me questions about my life, my family, my siblings. I kept telling him I didn't want to answer, and that's when he got really upset. The gun moved from her chest to her thigh, pressing hard enough to leave an imprint. Do you think this is a game?" Edwin's voice was cold, measured. "Do you think this is a joke? Because I will shoot you. I'm not joking." On paper, Edwin Lara looked like someone who protected people. At 34 years old, he worked as a campus security guard at Central Oregon Community College in Bend. He wore a uniform that looked almost identical to a police officer's. He drove a vehicle equipped with a rear cage, emergency lights, and a radio, everything that made it seem official, legitimate, safe. But beneath that surface, Edwin Lara was something else entirely. His wife, Isabel Ponce, herself a rookie police officer, had begun noticing changes in him. Strange behavior, unexplained absences. A darkness that seemed to be consuming him from the inside out. She had no idea that just one day before Andrea's kidnapping, her husband had already committed the unthinkable. 23-year-old Kaylee Sawyer was smart, strong, and funny, exactly how she'd once told her mother she wanted to be remembered. She worked as a dental assistant in Bend, Oregon, where she lived with plans that stretched far into the future. Her boyfriend Cameron loved her deeply. Her family adored her. She was the kind of person who couldn't decide on just one career path because she wanted to experience everything life had to offer. On July 23, 2016, Kaylee went out with Cameron to a local bar. They had an argument, the kind of fight couples have and usually forget about by morning. Upset, Kaylee walked off into the night near Central Oregon Community College, needing space to clear her head. When Cameron's calls went straight to voicemail, then started ringing without anyone answering, he knew something was wrong. Kaylee's mother, Julie Van Cleef, woke to her phone, pinging and pinging and pinging, with messages from Cameron and others asking if she'd heard from her daughter. "I called her first," Julie remembered, her voice breaking even years later. "And her phone went to voicemail. Sometimes it would go straight to voicemail, but sometimes it would ring. But nobody ever answered." That meant someone was still using Kaylee's phone. Someone who wasn't Kaylee. Both Cameron and Julie contacted the Bend Police Department. Within hours, a missing person investigation was underway. But what happened next would forever change how quickly they might have found Kaylee. Isabel Ponce, Edwin's wife, burst into her local police station with information that made detectives' blood run cold. Her husband had come home acting strange, she said. When she pressed him, he claimed he'd hit someone with his car, a girl. But his story didn't make sense. "You hit her with the car? That's an accident," Isabel told detectives she'd said to Edwin. "It doesn't make sense. You're lying to me." As Isabel spoke to investigators for hours, she revealed that Edwin had hidden some of Kaylee's belongings in their shed. He'd also stolen her service weapon and car before disappearing. The police immediately launched a manhunt, But Edwin Lara was already gone, driving in a straight line from Redmond toward Salem, over 100 miles away. And that's where Andrea Maze was spending her last normal evening, completely unaware that a killer was heading directly toward her. After forcing Andrea into her own car at gunpoint, Edwin drove for hours along the interstate. Andrea's mind raced through every possible outcome, and none of them ended with her going home. "I really thought I wasn't going to go home ever," she would later say, her voice steady but haunted. "I wasn't going to see my family. They were probably going to find my body in a ditch somewhere, or find me dead in a motel or something." But instead of breaking down, that fear gave Andrea something unexpected, a surge of defiance. "When I would feel like that, in those times, I would snap at him," she explained. "I would say things. Instead of crying or getting terribly upset, I'd get mad." Eventually, Edwin stopped at a shabby motel along the interstate. The establishment's security cameras captured footage that would later chill everyone who saw it. Andrea wiping away tears while the clerk at the counter remained completely unaware of what was happening right in front of him. To anyone walking by, it looked like a normal couple booking a room. But notice how Andrea keeps her distance, how her arms are crossed, how her eyes dart around anxiously. Notice how Edwin orders her to stand closer to him, and how she quickly wipes away a tear behind his back. Inside the motel room, Edwin ordered Andrea to strip down and shower in front of him. Her response was immediate and fierce. "In my head, I thought I'd rather die than shower in front of you," Andrea recalled. "And I told him that I don't care what you do to me at this point, because that would be honestly worse than dying." Frustrated, Edwin pushed Andrea onto the bed and forced her to take a sleeping pill. As she fought to stay awake, terrified of what he might do if she lost consciousness, Edwin leaned over and licked her earlobe. I was like, "Oh no, this is not going to happen." And then, in what Andrea would later describe as a miracle, her phone alarm went off. Edwin jumped at the sound, demanding to know what it meant. Andrea's mind raced. Without planning it, without even knowing where the idea came from, she lied. "That's my timer. I have to take medicine," she said. "For what?" "Well, I have an STD." The words hung in the air. It was a complete lie, but it was enough to make Edwin jump out of bed and start pacing. He grabbed his phone and made a call, speaking in fragments about helicopters. Even though the night outside was dead quiet, Edwin seemed convinced that police choppers were right outside the door. "We gotta go. Let's go." Andrea pleaded with him to let her go, but his answer only made everything worse. He still needed her as a human shield. In another room at the same motel, Jack Levy was preparing for what should have been a peaceful day, photographing butterflies at a nearby national park. At around 5 in the morning, he was loading camera gear into his truck when a strange man appeared, followed by a frightened young woman in handcuffs. "I initially said you must have found the wrong room," Jack remembered. "Next thing I recall is Edwin Lara flashing his gun." Jack yelled for help. Edwin told him he'd shoot. Jack yelled for help again. Edwin shot him. "The gun just went off and everything just kind of went black in my head," Jack said. The bullet tore through Jack's chest, narrowly missing his spine by about an inch. In front of Andrea's eyes, Edwin had just shot an innocent man for refusing to hand over his car keys. In a panic, Edwin grabbed Andrea and ran toward a gas station across the street. There, he spotted a car with its passenger door open. Without hesitation, he threw Andrea inside, slammed the door, and pointed his gun at the driver's head. "Drive? Or I'll shoot." The driver was 17-year-old Nima, who had just gotten his permit. His 14-year-old brother sat in the back. Their grandmother, who spoke no English, was also in the vehicle. Now, all three of them, along with Andrea, were Edwin's hostages. As Nima drove, his grandmother began screaming at Edwin, not understanding what was happening but clearly sensing the danger. Edwin's paranoia escalated. "Tell her to shut up, or I'll shoot," he snarled. Nima and his brother desperately tried to calm their grandmother, but they barely spoke their native Farsi. Meanwhile, Edwin began telling them stories about how he used to be a good guy, used to be a cop. Then he asked them a question that made Andrea's blood run cold. "Have you guys ever had the urge to kill?" Edwin grabbed all of the family's phones and handed them to Andrea. He pointed his gun directly between her eyes and ordered her to throw them out the window. Andrea made a split-second decision. Instead of just tossing them, she threw each phone as hard as she could toward the grass along the roadside, hoping they wouldn't break, hoping that somehow someone could use them to track where Edwin was taking them. After several miles, Nima pleaded with Edwin. They had the car. Why did he need them? In an inexplicable twist, Edwin agreed. He stopped along the road and told everyone to step out, everyone except Andrea. She begged to stay with Nima's family, to be let go now that Edwin had everything he needed. No, Edwin said, they'll try to shoot me and kill me if you're not with me. I still need that human shield. Andrea started crying again, the reality sinking in that she might never escape. I just want to go home. But Edwin's time was running out. Not long after dropping off Nima and his family, police sirens could be heard in the distance. The manhunt was closing in. Edwin grabbed Andrea's phone and started recording himself, his words rambling and disturbing. I used to kill that other girl, you know, she just kept screaming and I had to silence her forever. Then, at gunpoint, Edwin ordered Andrea to post the video to her Facebook account with the caption, "Crazy murderer on the loose." Andrea, terrified and traumatized, had no choice but to comply. The video would later become crucial evidence, but in that moment, it was just another violation, Edwin forcing her to participate in his twisted narrative. When police finally caught up with them on the interstate, Edwin sped up to over 120 miles per hour, weaving in and out of traffic. Then he grabbed Andrea's phone again and called 911. "Hi, this is Edwin Lara, and I'm the guy on Interstate 5, he told the dispatcher with chilling calmness. "Are you by yourself?" "I have someone with me. I kidnapped her in Oregon. She's innocent. Her name is Andrea." The dispatcher asked if he had weapons. Edwin's response was disturbing in its casualness. "Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I do have a gun on me. I can just give it to Andrea and see if she wants to kill me." The high-speed chase continued for 15 minutes, with Edwin driving recklessly at speeds exceeding 120 miles per hour. Then, suddenly, he hit the brakes and stopped. He handed Andrea's phone back to her, put his hands in the air, and walked out of the car. For the first time since her kidnapping began 19 hours earlier, Andrea was alone. She sobbed into the phone as the 911 operator tried to guide her through what to do next. "Andrea, are you okay? You don't need any medical anything?" "Okay, make sure your hands are up too, except I know you're on the phone right now, but just hold your hand up so they can see your hands too." The operator stayed on the line with Andrea, her voice steady and reassuring. "Andrea, it's gonna be okay." At that moment, Andrea felt a weight lift. I was like, oh my gosh, this is done. I can go home. This is over. I'm okay. I'm safe. But Andrea's ordeal was far from over. Due to a catastrophic miscommunication between Oregon and California authorities, police arrested both Edwin and Andrea when they arrived on scene. Despite Edwin clearly stating to the dispatcher that Andrea was innocent, that he had kidnapped her, confusion between the two departments led to Andrea being labeled as an accomplice. The media ran with it. News outlets reported that both Edwin Lara and Andrea Maze had been booked into the Tehama County Jail, charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, carjacking, and burglary. One reporter even suggested their relationship was still under investigation. Andrea was strip-searched and processed like a criminal. After everything she'd been through, 19 hours of terror, assault, being forced to witness violence, the very people who were supposed to protect her treated her as if she were guilty. "They completely treated me like I was the criminal," Andrea said, her voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and pain. "I felt 100% violated after everything I had just gone through." When police told her they needed to take her mugshot, Andrea asked why. "I didn't do anything. I kept trying to tell them what was going on." The Reading Police Department never issued a public apology to Andrea for her unlawful arrest and detention. There was no acknowledgement of the trauma they compounded, no accountability for the miscommunication that led to an innocent kidnapping victim being treated like a co-conspirator. Many who learned of Andrea's story later expressed outrage at this injustice, calling for the department to apologize and for Andrea to pursue legal action. The psychological impact of being arrested and processed as a criminal immediately after her traumatic ordeal cannot be overstated. It was a betrayal by the very system meant to protect her. While Andrea was being unlawfully detained in California, detectives in Oregon were interrogating Edwin about Kaylee Sawyer's whereabouts. Despite his violent crime spree, Edwin seemed almost eager to talk. What emerged was a confession so horrific that even seasoned investigators struggled to listen to it. Edwin revealed that he'd been working as a campus security guard when he spotted Kaylee walking alone after her argument with Cameron. He approached her, offering a ride. When she refused and tried to walk away, Edwin, wearing a uniform nearly identical to a police officer's and driving a vehicle equipped like a police cruiser, ordered her to stop. Kaylee saw through his deception and tried to run. Edwin struck her with his baton, rendering her unconscious. He then pulled her into the caged backseat of his security vehicle, the same kind of cage used in real police cars, and drove her to a secluded parking lot. When Kaylee regained consciousness, she fought with everything she had. She tried to crawl through the plexiglass partition, tried to turn on the emergency lights, grab the radio, honk the horn, anything to get help. She knew, the prosecutor would later say, her voice breaking. Edwin's confession revealed that he brutally attacked Kaylee, sexually assaulted her while she was dying, and then dragged her body behind a tree to finish what he'd started. The medical examiner would later confirm the extent of Kaylee's injuries, though her family was advised not to view the autopsy photos. When they asked to see her body to identify her, the words they heard were devastating. "You cannot see her because she's unrecognizable. The last time I got to kiss my baby girl on the forehead was through a black body bag," Julie Van Cleef said, tears streaming down her face. Edwin directed police to Kaylee's body along Highway 26 in Oregon. When first responders arrived, they thought for a moment she might still be alive. Her hand was positioned on the edge of a rock, as if she'd been trying to pull herself up the embankment. But Kaylee had clung to life for as long as she could. The police had arrived too late. The district attorney, determined to seek the death penalty, built what seemed like an ironclad case. But then came another catastrophic failure by law enforcement, this time with consequences that would affect the entire prosecution. When Edwin was first booked into the Tehama County Jail in California, he asked jail staff, "When do I get a lawyer? My lawyer, I'm here." According to jail staff, they interpreted this as a procedural question rather than a specific request for an attorney. They never provided him with legal counsel before detectives began questioning him, a clear violation of his Miranda rights. Because of this violation, the judge dismissed Edwin's confession entirely. Even though everyone knew what had happened, even though Edwin had described Kaylee's murder in chilling detail, that confession could not be used in court. The Redding Police Department never publicly apologized for this error, either an error that nearly allowed a confessed killer to escape the full weight of justice. Critics have pointed out that the failure to honor Edwin's right to an attorney, combined with the unlawful treatment of Andrea, reveals a pattern of incompetence and lack of accountability that demands reform. The district attorney and detectives had to rebuild their case from the ground up, using only the physical evidence, the bloody clothes found in Edwin's shed, the forensic evidence from Kaylee's body, the testimony of witnesses. It was painstaking work, but they were determined. When they presented their rebuilt case to Edwin's defense team, his attorneys knew they were cornered. They offered a plea deal. If the prosecution would drop the death penalty, Edwin would plead guilty and accept life in prison without the possibility of parole. The decision fell to Julie Van Cleef, Kaylee's mother. The prosecutor explained what a death penalty case would mean: decades of appeals, having to show up to court again and again and again. "I would have had to show up to every appeal as long as he's living on death row," Julie said. "I would be too." She made the agonizing choice to accept the plea deal. Edwin would spend the rest of his life in prison, but there would be no more trials, no more appearances, no more having to relive her daughter's death over and over again. After her release from jail and the dropping of all charges against her, Andrea fell into a darkness that nearly consumed her. She struggled with severe PTSD and depression, becoming what her family described as a shadow of her former self. "Why is all this happening to me?" Andrea remembered thinking. "I felt like my life was going downhill. I was just dead for 2 years, and my family will even tell you I was not the same person. I was completely shut down, shut out of life. I didn't have any interest. I didn't want to do anything." Her grandmother, Elizabeth Maze, had never believed Andrea could have been involved in Edwin's crimes. "She's not a bad girl. She doesn't drink. She doesn't smoke. We're church people. She's a good girl. She doesn't know nothing about the world." But knowing you're innocent and recovering from trauma are two different things. It took Andrea nearly 2 years to begin healing. "I woke up one day and I was like, you know what? I need to turn myself around," Andrea said. "The only person that's going to change this is me. You have to love yourself again and treat yourself with respect and kindness and move past and work on those things." Andrea realized something crucial about survival. When you go through something, you can't sit there and paint yourself as a victim. Because if you do, you'll never move past it. You have to think of the situation and be like, okay, something terrible happened to me, but I can turn it around and make something good out of it. I can help others. I can share my story. As Andrea worked on her recovery, Kaylee's family channeled their grief into action. They filed a lawsuit against Central Oregon Community College for allowing Edwin to work as a campus security guard without proper background checks or psychological evaluations, and for equipping untrained security personnel with police-grade gear, and vehicles that made them virtually indistinguishable from actual law enforcement. The family won their case, but more importantly, their fight led to real change. In June of 2025, the Oregon Senate unanimously passed Senate Bill 576, also known as Kaylee's Law. This legislation prohibits non-police campus security guards from using vehicles with rear cages and requires more thorough background checks for anyone working in campus security. In the height of their tragedy, the prosecutor later reflected, Kaylee's family stepped up and said, "We're going to make sure that no young person has to go through what our daughter did." Julie Van Cleef found her own path through grief, learning to focus on the joy Kaylee had brought into her life rather than only on the loss. "Every morning, I wake up and I love her more and more each day, just like I did when she was here," Julie said. "I've gotten to that point sometimes where I look at a picture and I smile. And I'm so glad for that." Nima and his family, who had been taken hostage during Edwin's desperate flight, moved forward with their lives, forever changed by those terrifying hours, but determined not to let Edwin Lara define their story. Jack Levy, the butterfly photographer who was shot in the motel parking lot, made a remarkable recovery. Years later, he returned to that same Super 8 motel and stayed in the same room where he'd been shot. "I moved on with my life," Jack said simply, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. When Edwin's sentencing finally came, nearly 3 years after Kaylee's murder, Andrea had recovered enough to face him one last time. With the support of Kaylee's family, with whom she'd formed a deep friendship born from shared trauma, Andrea stood before the court and spoke directly to Edwin. No cameras were allowed inside the courtroom that day, but Andrea proudly repeated her words to journalists waiting outside. "My main thing in there was just, you know what, you tried to paint me as this victim and this weak person, and that's not who I am. I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. I'm a warrior. I defeated him." Her voice rang with conviction as she added, "And I am truly blessed." The story of Andrea Maze and Kaylee Sawyer reveals both the best and worst of our justice system. Kaylee's family transformed their tragedy into lasting change that will protect future students. Andrea turned her trauma into a message of hope and resilience for other survivors. But the failures cannot be ignored. The miscommunication that led to Andrea's arrest, the denial of Edwin's right to an attorney that nearly derailed the prosecution, the lack of accountability from the Reading Police Department, these errors compound the trauma experienced by victims and undermine public trust in law enforcement. Andrea never received the apology she deserved for being treated as a criminal when she was a victim. Many who have learned her story have called for her to pursue legal action against the department, arguing that accountability requires more than just quietly dropping charges. The psychological harm of being arrested, strip-searched, and processed as an accomplice immediately after 19 hours of kidnapping and terror represents a failure of the system that should protect survivors, not further victimize them. The questions raised by these failures remain urgent. How can law enforcement agencies improve communication protocols to prevent innocent victims from being arrested? What reforms are necessary to ensure officers properly honor constitutional rights, even for suspects? And how can departments be held accountable when their mistakes compound the trauma of survivors? These are not abstract policy questions. They are lived experiences of real people. Andrea, who was handcuffed twice in one day, first by her kidnapper and then by the police, who should have been her protectors. Kaylee, whose murder confession was nearly thrown out entirely because of police errors. Their families, who had to watch justice almost slip away because of avoidable mistakes. Today, Andrea Maze shares her story with the hope of inspiring other survivors. She speaks openly about her journey through trauma and recovery, emphasizing that healing is possible but requires work, self-compassion, and the courage to reframe your narrative. "I never would have thought my story could touch other people and inspire people," Andrea said. "And it's amazing to know that it does." Kaylee Sawyer's memory lives on not just in the hearts of those who loved her, but in the law that bears her name, a law that will protect countless students from predators who hide behind the false legitimacy of security uniforms and police-like equipment. Pay attention to these two young women. Kaylee, who fought with everything she had in her final moments. Andrea, who survived 19 hours of terror and then had to survive the system that should have protected her. Their stories are painful reminders of the darkness that can exist in the world, but also powerful testaments to resilience, courage, and the possibility of turning tragedy into purpose. One life was taken too soon, one life was nearly destroyed. But both women, through their own strength and the love of those who remember them, have left an indelible mark on the world. Kaylee, through the law that protects others. Andrea, through her message that survival is not just about making it through the worst day of your life, but about choosing every day after to be more than what happened to you. This is the story of the girl in the black dress who refused to be just a victim. This is the story of the girl who walked into the night and whose memory now protects others. This is the story of 19 hours that changed everything and the courage it took to transform that darkness into light.